Hi, my name's Stephen England from The Art of Sustainability, and in 2019 I had the great privilege of interviewing Herbert Girardet from the Club of Rome, a key contributor to the 2018 report Come On. The theme of the interview was the shadow of Enlightenment, the Enlightenment playing a key theme in the report. And my fourth question to Herbie was concerned with the well-being of future generations. So Herbie, we've come sort of to towards the end of the conversation. It's been really fascinating. I'm looking at the philosophy that we're going to need for this new Enlightenment, looking specifically following the story of technology. But I think I really want to move on to future generations.
Sure.
And specifically in Wales, we're saying here we are in Wales with the legislation, the well-being future generations legislation, which is very, very poignant, I think. So I think what, keeping in mind the shadow that has been cast from ourselves and from our predecessors, the shadow that young people are having to live through. I think there's two kind of questions that come out of that. One is, what is the role of the elders ourselves in terms of trying to lessen the shadow, and what message have we got for the younger generation?
Sure.
So if we can just
go into that issue. Okay, fine. Well, I think in Wales we're in a very interesting situation, in fact a unique situation, because there's no other part of the world, country or region which has a future well-being of future generations act. At the World Future Council, which I worked with for 15 years, we tried to bring about a situation where, for instance, the United Nations might have a future generations commissioner. That didn't succeed. We tried it in various other countries at the national level. That didn't succeed, except Wales uniquely decided 5 or 6 years ago to introduce this policy. So suddenly now, uniquely in the world, here is a country that has said, okay, all decisions that we make, whether it's governments or whether it's companies, should be measured or should be weighed up against the impact it has on people 50, 100, 200 years from now. Now that's a really incredible decision to make. And the question, of course, what does that mean in practical terms? So there is this commissioner whose task is to then scrutinize decisions in this way. And certainly she is beginning to kind of make an impact. I mean, take for instance road development. I mean, there was recently a plan to build congestion, to relieve congestion on the M4 by building a road right through the Gwent Levels, which is in a pasture and wildlife area. And basically, as a result of her proposals, it was decided not to build that relief road. So that is an important decision, but at the same time some people are very cross about it because it will affect some businesses in Cardiff and elsewhere who would have preferred having more fluent traffic going to those places. By and large, the question of how we can decide today about what we do in order to reduce the pressures on future generations is still a largely unanswered question. Because, for instance, in Wales, there was proposals on the table to build the Swansea Lagoon as a power station. That was not followed through, because even though that was a kind of energy policy that would have been very positive in terms of providing electricity on a sustainable and renewable basis. So we are now seeing a kind of conflict between the desire of the Welsh government to have a thriving economy and the decision to really weigh up everything in terms of its benefit to future generations. That also raises the future of farming. In Wales, you know, a very substantial part of the economy is farming. But at the same time, at the moment, policies are not necessarily encouraging sustainable farming. There's a tremendous problem with fertilizer runoff and pesticide runoff from fields into rivers, into streams, into rivers. The River Wye is affected by it, or our local rivers. Similarly, we have cities and towns disposing of their waste into rivers rather than returning it to farmland. So all of these are important decisions that ultimately have to be made, but are still not being made. So there's a very positive intention to have a country that really is concerned about the well-being of people many years from now, but in reality to implement it is still a very tall order. Nevertheless, I think the world is being forced to think in that direction, and that again is largely to the pressure of young people. Basically, young people saying, enough is enough. We want a future, and we want not just any old future, we want a good future. We want a future without pollution, without climate change, and all the rest of it. So today we are in a situation, we have all the technologies available to us to lead a sustainable, regenerative lifestyle on this planet. The question is whether or not the pressure of young people and organizations can really become so central in decision making that ultimately these are not just dreams for a different kind of future than the one that we are heading towards at the moment if we are not very, very careful. We know that climate change is a huge issue now. We know that pollution of all kinds is causing massive impacts on the world's ecosystem. So all of these things are happening right now and ultimately burdening future generations rather than making life better for the future. So we have a lot of ideas and policies and technologies potentially in place. The question now is implementation. It's great to be optimistic, but optimism has to be realistic at the same time. So I would say we need realistic optimism, but a lot of effort by us all, campaigning effort and determination to really make a difference. And that means filmmaking, that means talks, that means mass movements in the streets, that means occupying cities, that means all these things that catch the media attention. It is very interesting in the last few months, and this is, August 2019, we have seen a lot of programs on television dealing with climate change, burning forests, pollution of the oceans. All of that is beginning to happen. Now the question is, can we strongly encourage the decision makers, both politicians but also business leaders, to say, okay, yes, there's no other way but to head in that direction.
It's quite interesting because going back to the earlier point about how government creates the conditions for investors to invest in and affect consumers by what they're offering. So within, I know one of the things that you are very keen on is citizen participation, and especially about young people's participation in government. I mean, we have a because of what's going on. I think there's a lot more enthusiasm to get involved, but the ability for younger people, other than through protest, to actually get involved in government is a bit of a challenge. So could you just touch upon that?
I certainly can. I have a really nice case study, I think that was worth mentioning here. 17 years ago, in 2003, I was invited to be a thinker in residence in Adelaide, South Australia, by the government of South Australia. My job was to basically look at this region of 1.7 million people and say, okay, it's highly unsustainable, a lot of water is wasted, a lot of energy comes from, all the energy comes from fossil fuels. It's no longer the way to move forward. Can we do things differently? So we had a 10-week process where we involved everybody, all the social groups within South Australia, in meetings every day. We had 3 seminars a day involving students, civil servants, business leaders, environmentalists, the lot. Every day discussing issues like how could we supply energy in the future? What about the future of transport? What about the organic waste of Adelaide? Can that be returned to the local farmland? What about efficient use of water? What about retrofitting existing buildings? It was a brilliant, exciting process. It nearly killed me, but the end result was 32 policies for a sustainable Adelaide, and the good news is they were all implemented. South Australia today has over 50% renewable energy. It returns 100% of its organic waste to its local farmland. It uses recycled wastewater to irrigate that farmland. It has retrofitted a lot of buildings that were highly energy inefficient before. They planted 3 million trees for carbon absorption and for stabilizing erosion. So it's really a very exciting outcome that came from this. These things can be done, but the question is whether we can do it not just on a local scale somewhere in different parts of the world, but globally. And that is the issue now that we really need to put at the top agenda of the United Nations, and beyond that, the G7, the G20, and all the other international bodies, business organizations, the Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's really of critical importance now to get mainstream with all of this. And so the pressure from young people to help implement that is of critical importance.
They are demanding significant changes, and one of the big areas for younger generations and this area is around education. And the importance of education. They are asking questions of the educational services in terms of how are you, if I'm coming to you and spending my money with you and training with you, what are you doing about my future? And education, I think, for future generations and people coming through, and the area that I'm very much involved in with the art of sustainability is around the language, because my generation, our generation, come out of a post-war worldview where effectively we are about human development, rebuilding a war-torn world. That narrative has run its course, and future generations, young people, are saying, what is the new narrative? What is the narrative of hope for ourselves? And that's a very important message that they want to hear. They want to hear answers to these questions. And how are we elders? What are we about to hand over to them? A world which gives them meets their needs as much as it's met our needs. So I think, and I know through the Schumacher and through various other organisations, your education is a very important part of what you think is part of not just a technology refix. Going back to the beginning, what we're saying, it's not just about a technological change, it's about a change in education and how we interact and behave and see ourselves as part of the world. So if we could just say something about education.
Well, of course, environmental sciences are barely taught in schools or even in universities. It's still not a sort of major part of the curriculum. Very few schools have gardens, for instance, vegetable gardens, where kids can learn to grow stuff. So certainly a reorientation in education, both at secondary, primary school level, at comprehensive level, but also at universities, is of critical importance. But kids will tend to become involved in education and university courses if they reckon there's a job there at the end. So that's certainly an issue. But meanwhile, we need to certainly say, how can we speed up education? Because we all know we have very little time to make the really significant changes that are needed. So I'd say a key part of all this, of course, is social media. So we have seeing all these amazing websites, as well as the TV programs, but websites, so many different websites are now pointing in the right direction in terms of a regenerative future. That's certainly beginning to happen. But the question is really how to speed up perceptions of change, not just in the minds of people growing up today, young people today, but also existing decision makers, because they have to reorientate as well. In fact, without them changing their ways and changing the focus of what they do, we are buggered basically anyway. So speed of education is critically important today, and so we have the media to do that. But certainly overall, the question of how we match the need for change with the need for moving in the right direction in terms of how we think is still a somewhat unanswered question. When we talk about economics once more, the reality of creating circular economies, which is absolutely central to all of these discussions, we are still not seeing significant change in that direction. So unless we are really going to get people to focus up to the seriousness of what we are facing very quickly, then we are really not going to, match the need for change in the way that we urgently need to.
It's this idea that we have everything we need. We just need to get on with it at the end of the day and accelerate and focus our attentions on the biggest challenge we face, planetary challenge we face, which is climate change. And we haven't really gone into that area because it's such a huge area in its own right, and we've stayed with the technology. So what's your message of hope? What if you could sum it up? I mean, we've touched upon these huge challenges. What would you say? Just two or three words. A message of hope.
Well, the loudest message of hope really comes from young people today, not only from going to the streets and demonstrate, but also from other young people. I mean, hardly publicized, for instance, is an initiative of a German kid who started as a 10-year-old saying, okay, we need to plant trees, 1 billion trees on this planet. So they started a 1 billion trees program, and they very cleverly linked up with all sorts of local groups around the planet. And they're now saying no longer billion trees program, but trillion trees program. So that is of really critical importance for that kind of message to be driven home. We've seen massive deforestation globally as a result of the development of modern civilization. We need to put trees back in place, and so there's about 3.5 billion trees on this planet. So we have taken about half away from logging over the centuries. There used to be about double that number before. Now there's this movement to say, okay, let us plant not just 1 billion but 1 trillion trees. So that's very encouraging. Then farming systems that are being developed, organic farming, permaculture, agroforestry, these are all concepts that are very mature now. There are case studies and examples for how these things are being implemented in different parts of the world. Amplifying and accelerating these ideas in the real world, that's what it's all about. So basically giving publicity to best practice and best policy. These are the key issues today, and I think without that we're not going to see the rapid change that we now need.
Herbie, thank you very much.
Pleasure.